Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old 4th Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
I hope you had a really good weekend. The weather was really nice here in the metro Atlanta area until like late last night. A clap of thunder woke me up. I don't know what time it was, 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning. Just brutal storms rolling through last night. Hope everybody's safe from that. Columnist and writer from the Georgia Recorder, Jay Bookman, joins us to discuss the giant game of Jenga MAGA Republicans are playing at the federal level and opine on when that Jenga puzzle all comes crumbling to the ground. Not if, when. We'll discuss that second half of the show. Let's get started by where we pretty much left off last Friday. As we were leaving the show last week, we found out that SB 68 got the crucial votes it needed in both the Georgia House and the Georgia Senate and will now await Governor Brian Kemp's signature. That was the legislative plum for him that he sought. And there are repercussions for votes, both on the left and the right. We'll talk about a Republican who voted against tort reform in the Georgia General Assembly, who hours later lost his job. I mean, if this party's not being run like a mafia organization from the White House on down, Governor Brian Kemp, are you a mob boss, or do you condone this sort of behavior within your state party? There were 3 votes in the Georgia House by Democrats for SB 68. We have Carr Gilliard from Savannah, Mac Jackson from Sandersville, Washington County, rural Washington County, Georgia, and Representative Dr. Michelle Au. I reached out to her to see if she'd like to come on the show. She did release a statement. She is catching a ton of grief on her political Facebook like page. I'll share that in the show notes at ronshowatl.com, as well as her letter, her response as to why she decided to vote in favor of the Georgia tort reform bill. Remember now, she's a doctor. She comes from a medical background. She works in the medical profession. And so she feels as if that experience gives her a bit of some inside knowledge, some experience in that realm that makes her feel as if she is right to vote the way she did. My mother worked for podiatrists, chiropractors, dental clinics, et cetera, and so on, office management. And it is from her experience that I gleaned a little bit of insight into the malpractice insurance that private practices, doctors have to pay, hospitals, I'm sure, as well. And so I'm a little surprised by Dr. Au's vote. However, upon reading her letter, this sounds like a familiar tone. She wrote this 3 days ago and writes, I have long noted that the legal environment in Georgia is hostile to the safe quality practice of medicine. And in my years in the state legislature, my focus always has been on improving access to that care, decreasing healthcare costs, protecting and enhancing care quality, and growing our healthcare workforce. Dr. Au's letter continues, there are many aspects of the legal environment I wish we were discussing instead of Senate Bill 68. I wish we were talking about a repeal of Georgia's 6-week abortion ban, which makes patients less safe and criminalizes doctors for doing their jobs. I wish we were discussing broader factors that would increase the recruitment, training, and retention of physicians in this state, especially to our rural communities. Dr. Au's letter continues, I wish we were addressing our state's high uninsurance rate, which places unsustainable financial pressure on our hospital systems and leads to patients delaying timely care, yielding a sicker population and higher costs for everyone. Those bills have not been advanced. Those bills are not in front of me for a vote. What was placed in front of me was SB 68, Dr. Au writes, a bill aiming to reform the medical malpractice system, placing crushing pressure on our healthcare workforce, leading to fewer doctors training and practicing in Georgia and accelerating premature attrition from direct patient care. I deeply respect our civil justice system, she writes. I understand it is a bedrock of our democratic society and essential for our constituents to access when they have been hurt or wronged. Dr. Au's letter goes to the next page. I care for those who have experienced injury, assault, and trauma in my work as a practicing physician and have seen in my own experience victims of medical malpractice and support their right to seek redress. Given my legislative profile, it is implausible to accuse me of being in the pocket of insurance companies, who I have continually held to account, in particular to cover health care costs. I have a record, including an earlier vote last week, of protecting access to the courts. It is implausible to accuse me of not caring for the rights of patients, children, families, or those with the least among us. I will continue to work and fight for them, both at the bedside and at the Capitol. Georgia is not an environment in which everyone can sue anyone for anything, nor does SB 68 envisage an environment in which wronged party will be barred from bringing a civil suit under any circumstance. What we have now on that sliding scale is something in between, and this bill slides that balance in a way that I hope will attenuate the litigation stresses on small businesses and the medical community. Again, I'm reading from Dr. Michelle Au, explaining why she is one of 3 Democrats in the Georgia House who voted for SB 68, tort reform. She continues, it is by no means a perfect bill. There are elements I object to, but on balance, I think it protects our fair, equal access for all to our justice system, while hopefully addressing the ways our litigation environment has become untenable for many. I deeply respect those expert leaders in my caucus who worked so fiercely on this bill. I look up to them and I consider them friends and mentors. I do not take any vote lightly, and this one in particularly weighed heavily on me, not just because of the heft of the issue, but because of that high regard I hold for those who voted differently than I have. Reasonable people can disagree and still work towards common goals, Dr. Au writes. Governance, at its best, is a careful, balanced, deliberative process. I hope I've clearly explained mine. It is my honor to serve as a member of the Georgia House Democratic Caucus and as your representative for the 50th House District. In service, Michelle Au. To give full transparency, I did reach out to her this morning via email to see if she'd like to come on the show, and I welcome her when she does. She has been on a couple, 3 times, I think, before, and always a very civil and very thought-provoking conversation. She is a smart woman. She knows what she's doing. I have immense respect for her. I happen to disagree with this vote, mostly because this comes back to the same thing that I think we're seeing with like Senator Chuck Schumer in Washington. Leverage. You are in a position of leverage. Did you get anything in return for this vote? This vote was necessary. It passed by 1 vote. It was a necessary vote. 2 other Democrats, again, voting with her. Leverage. Those 3 had leverage. I wrote and said, I see you're catching a good deal of flack for your vote on SB 68, and man, she is. More than 120 comments so far on her representative page on Facebook. I said, if you'd like, I'd love to have you on to discuss it and any correlation you see with the response Senator Schumer received over the continuing resolution, maybe Atlanta parents' blowback from trans activists. I told her I read her letter, that I don't find myself in agreement with the decision, but I understand how malpractice insurance affects private practices and wanted to offer an opportunity to have a civil dialogue with her on that. And hopefully she'll respond. If not, I get it. She's in session, busy person. She's got a career outside of working in the General Assembly as well, so there's that. But it's, again, it kind of, to me, comes back to leverage. Was there something to glean from that? Because she has championed some fantastic legislation that can't even get anything more than a committee hearing, let alone a vote. Safe storage for guns, which doesn't infringe on anybody's Second Amendment rights, and yet she cannot get Republicans to put a vote to it. Like, maybe a little concession there. Well, how about you give a little more attention to my Safe Storage Act? Let's get a vote on that. There was also some blowback on the right. In fact, we saw a lawmaker lose his job after voting against, that's right, Brian Kemp's tort reform measure. State Representative Vance Smith from Pine Mountain, was president and CEO of the Harris County Chamber of Commerce. Greg Bluestein at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution reporting, officials said he was ousted from the job on Friday only hours after the House narrowly approved the measure without Vance Smith's support. It became obvious that we had different visions for the future success of our organization and its members, and it was time for us to move forward in a different direction, according to the board's chair, Teresa Garcia Robertson, in an email. On Sunday, Garcia Robertson declined to comment on personnel matters, but added that board members hold Vance in high regard. This is a quote here: Vance in high regard personally and appreciate his service to our community and his district. Greg Bluestein points out, Garcia Robertson is the wife of State Senator Randy Robertson, one of the top Republicans in the Georgia Senate. Smith, according to Greg Bluestein, was one of at least 8 House Republicans who voted against the Kemp-backed rewrite of litigation rules which passed the House on Thursday with the bare 91 votes needed. On Friday, the Senate voted to send it to Kemp's desk. As he pointed out, 3 House Democrats who backed the measure are facing blowback for what party leaders compared to a betrayal. One of the 3, State Representative Mac Johnson of Sandersville, has flirted with switching parties. Okay. When we come back, Senator Jon Ossoff kicked off his re-election campaign in Atlanta. 2,000 excited folks at the Eastern. And I'll give you some of the audio of his speech. Talk about who's lining up on the right to run against him. And by the way, insiders seem to be telling reporters Brian Kemp isn't really looking at that. Okay. And as I mentioned earlier, we have Jay Bookman, columnist writer at the Georgia Recorder. He wrote a piece last week that we covered, I believe, on Thursday's show that talked about the giant game of Jenga that MAGA is playing at the federal level. And we all know how the Jenga game ends up. Big pile on the ground. We'll have all that when the Ron Show returns on America One Radio, Progressive Voices via TuneIn, or wherever you podcast. You can always call the Ron Show. It's 404-919-2725. Text message as well. Either way, send me a message. Let me know what you're thinking. Any response that you have to whatever we're covering here. You can also email the show, ron at ronshowatl.com. Follow the show on your preferred social media platforms, Blue Sky, Instagram, Facebook, Threads. I'm sure I'm forgetting something. Oh, yeah, Twitter X. That. At Ron Show ATL. Senator Jon Ossoff kicked off his re-election campaign in earnest over the weekend before about 2,000 folks inside the Eastern. And by the way, before I give you some audio of that speech, there's now a lot less conversation about a primary challenge. Representative Esther Panich had talked, by the way, the only Jewish American in the Georgia General Assembly, had been rumored as someone who might challenge Senator Ossoff for the Democratic nomination. She has put the kibosh on that. There was, some talk about her being dissatisfied with a lot of other maybe Jewish American Georgia voters for Ossoff, voting to limit certain arms sales to Israel in its war in Gaza, according to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. She says she's a hard no. She says, I'm very happy where I am. If I sought higher office, I would not fulfill my goal for running in the first place, which is to have a Jewish member of the General Assembly. Now, which you're not reading into that is an endorsement of Senator Jon Ossoff. However, State Representative Esther Panich, who had previously been rumored to be considering a run against him, has decided not to. Let's see. Greg Bluestein at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution at the event yesterday reports that some insiders doubt that Governor Brian Kemp will enter this Senate race. Jockeying already underway among other prominent Republicans, including Insurance Commissioner John King, Representative Buddy Carter, Mike Collins, Rich McCormick, and Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. You know what? If any of those names are up against Jon Ossoff gets reelected. Here is some of his speech, by the way.
Atlanta, you look beautiful. You look beautiful. Thank you, Gerald.
Atlanta, are you doing something different with your hair? Is there a new fragrance you're wearing?
These are serious times, Atlanta. With open contempt for the law, this president has launched a power grab unprecedented in our history, abusing his power and trying to poison our democracy with fear and intimidation. In his first 100 days, he set free criminals who did violence on his behalf. He purged independent watchdogs across the government who investigate corruption and abuse. He stacked the most powerful offices with personal loyalists and then called on those same loyalists to investigate and prosecute his opponents. He's undermined the freedom of the press. He's retaliated against lawyers who have opposed him in court. He's defied and threatened federal judges. And he's given massive and unaccountable power to the richest man in the world who spent $300 million to elect him president of the United States. Now, Atlanta, this is not a drill. Atlanta, this is not a bad dream. As citizens, this is the test of our lifetime. So tell me, Atlanta, are you ready to fight?
All right, we'll skip ahead a few minutes here.
But Atlanta, we don't have the luxury of despair because there are so many counting on us. Children and pregnant women who rely on Medicaid. Veterans who have earned their care and benefits. Children in our public schools. Cancer patients counting on the next big breakthrough. An entire world hoping the United States has not given up on freedom. My little girl and all our children who deserve to grow up in a kind and fair and decent country. And the truth is, beyond personal revenge, there's not much to this president's agenda. It's tax breaks for the rich and rounding up immigrants. That's the whole program.
And other people.
We've seen the bill. Paid for by blowing out the deficit, cutting Medicaid, and trying to close the new factories we helped open that make chips and solar panels and electric vehicles. Right. That's the whole agenda. Let me ask you, yes or no? Will your family's life improve because we borrow trillions of dollars to cut taxes for the wealthiest people in the country? Will your family's life improve because our military bases become prison camps for immigrants? When Medicaid covers nearly half of the births in our state, 2/3 of all seniors in nursing homes, 40% of children, will your family's life improve because they gut Medicaid? No! See, part of the shame of this useless spiral into chaos and revenge.
It's a good term.
Is that we really face so many urgent challenges. And there are so many problems that we can solve. Our prisons are full of violence and abuse. Women die needlessly from pregnancy and childbirth, especially here in Georgia. Hospitals continue to close. Seniors can't afford glasses and hearing aids because Medicare won't cover them. Veterans can't get VA coverage for dental care. Families live paycheck to paycheck. The federal debt keeps growing, but top earners wind up paying less than firefighters and public school teachers.
Stay on that message.
Now, look, I'm not saying these problems are cheap and easy to solve, but we could solve them. And we must solve them. And none of this is on the administration's agenda. They just do not care. They do not care. Trump's cabinet is worth like $60 billion. That's not even including Elon. They are literally the elites they pretend to hate. The president is not at his palace in Florida thinking about whether you can afford daycare for your daughter.
Nope.
Or how to stop insurance companies from denying your claim, or anything that matters to our daily lives.
Nope.
When is the last time you even heard Donald Trump talk about health care or
Right.
child
Where's
care?
that beautiful plan, right? Exactly.
He's talking about invading Greenland. He's handing your data over to Elon Musk. By the way, I'm all for government efficiency. And government programs aren't sacred, they have to work. But when you randomly fire tens of thousands of people, no matter what role they fill no matter how well they're performing, and then you have to scramble to fire them back because you accidentally fired the people who run the Veterans Crisis Line, and you accidentally fired the people who watch out for Ebola at the CDC, and you accidentally fired the people who fight bird flu on our poultry farms, and the people who protect our nuclear weapons. When you shut down research into Alzheimer's treatments and cures for childhood cancer, that's not efficiency. That's just cruelty and chaos.
Oh, okay, the Nazi line. Republicans never want to solve problems, though. They want to marginalize people and politicize those problems, like a petulant kid smearing his vegetables around the plate versus, just eating them, thinking that it's going to fool mom or dad. Well, it's fooled the voters for a while. But I believe the FAFO factor is real and momentum is building. We'll have that entire speech in the show notes at RonShowATL.com. Jay Bookman joins us next here on The Ron Show.
Broadcasting 5 days a week to make common sense common again. This is The Ron Show on America One Radio.
Journalist, opinion writer Jay Bookman from the Georgia Recorder joins us. We touched on your piece in the Georgia Recorder on Thursday's show. Flushing federal systems down the toilet could return Georgia to days of foul water and air. And while you did touch on the environmental impacts, you actually now we have this headline, this story that Donald Trump has signed an executive order, not that he has the authority to do so, to dismantle the Department of Education, which stretches back to the Jimmy Carter presidency. Your immediate thoughts on what sort of impacts we will see on the ground as a result of an act like that?
It depends on what he means by dismantle. I mean, we have DOE handles a lot of grant money. They, especially for poor schools. So it's they handle student loan programs. They handle all kinds of things. What's important is the things they don't handle. They don't set state curriculum. They do not set state teacher standards. They do not. All these things that supposedly the federal government is dictating, they don't do those things. So it's one of those. If you eliminate DOE, they don't seem to have a plan for what comes next. It's just off with his head, and then we'll deal with the consequences.
This is another one of those situations where it feels like if I were to pop the hood and my car breaks down, I pop the hood to look at it. I'm going to pop the hood and I'm going to look at it, but I don't know what the hell I'm looking at. I don't know what I'm doing. Right. And that's kind of that seems to be the overarching theme of MAGA and Doge and dismantling and unfunding and cutting programs. They don't really know what they're doing. They're just pulling wires and plugs and hoping that, less under the hood will make the engine run better.
Right. The metaphor I used in the column was
yes.
You've got amateur house flippers coming in and with sledgehammers and taking out all the interior walls, whether they're load bearing or not. They don't even know which ones are load bearing, and they don't even know what load bearing means. They're just knocking walls down.
And obviously, it doesn't even seem like they're cutting the utilities. Just somebody gets hurt along the way. It happens. I like the giant game of Jenga reference too. Now that is so appropriate. Anybody and we've all played Jenga at some point in time. You keep pulling things that are foundational, and eventually the whole thing crumbles.
Good, and that's what they're doing. They're taking this piece from over here and this piece from over there, and again, people who don't have. I mean, our Secretary of Education is the queen of studio wrestling.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the expertise we've hired to come in and decide which functions should be saved and which should not.
The ultimate DEI hire among them all, if you ask me. I mean, she checks the box. I mean, she's a white female. White females benefited most from DEI, so it just tracks that she would be the pick for Department of Education.
So yeah, they're just taking it apart piece by piece without really knowing how the parts all fit together, and it's. Sooner or later, I mean, they've already screwed up multiple times.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is efficient. It bears no resemblance to any efficiency I've ever seen.
I'm curious how much you have a grasp on, like, early U.S. history when we were living through the Articles of Confederation that were not working, when it was a very state-centric model for It was like 13 independent nation states under one flag. And I feel like that's what they want to go back to. It didn't work the first time.
Well, in some ways, it's what they want to go back to. But under the Articles of Confederation, you didn't have a super powerful chief executive in Donald Trump who can issue executive orders to do whatever the hell he wants to do. That's a whole different model. So in some ways, they are. You're right, correct. Reverting to the Articles of Confederation, devolving power back to the states, etc. But in other ways, they're centralizing immense amounts of power within the White House.
I guess they don't look forward to the year when President Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is sworn in as the next or the 48th president of the United States and has all that power. I guess it doesn't seem like they're even considering that.
Well, I don't think they have any intention of surrendering power. I mean, if we get right down to it, I mean, we saw how hard they fought at the end of Trump's first term to avoid the peaceful transfer of power. We saw how close it came to not being transferred. Now you have a situation in which all the they've cleaned house of anybody who's willing to who might be willing to stand up to Trump. The DOJ, FBI, Pentagon. All the power centers, I don't think they have any intention of surrendering power in 4 years.
That's frightening. I mean, it's just chilling. I mean, I don't disagree with you. I think I have a similar assessment when you have a Kash Patel as the head of the FBI and Pam Bondi, overseeing, your Justice Department. Find or Pete Hegseth over defense. Find me the agency or the agency head that's going to have the courage to say, no, sir, you lost, or no, sir, we lost. We have to cede power. There's going to be a peaceful transition, et cetera, and so on. I mean,
one of the screening questions for hiring people in this administration is, did Donald Trump lose the 2020 election? If you say yes, he did, you're not hired.
Yeah.
So you're selecting people who are going to support an overturning of the election.
Yeah, his loyalty. I was watching clips. I've been watching clips for weeks now of Republican Congress folks going back and doing town halls. I don't know why they're still doing them. I thought the word on the street was don't do these anymore. But Harriet Hageman is the latest victim of her own constituency by going back to Wyoming and hosting a town hall. She won her district. First of all, in a primary over Liz Cheney, a Republican from the Cheney family, which has a brand. And Donald Trump overwhelmingly won the state of Wyoming. And yet, Harriet Hageman is persona non grata in her own state right now. I happen to think that come 2026, if this sentiment remains, and you have to imagine things aren't going to get much better on this. They're
going to get worse. They're going to get worse
as the chainsaw continues to wield its authority, and the giant game of Jenga continues. I love that analogy, by the way. Great job. This could be a huge blue wave in 2026, with a House sweeping into Democratic power in 2026, and maybe control of the Senate goes back. The map doesn't look good, but I mean the sentiment around the country is really bad right now. For MAGA, for Doge, for Elon Musk, for Donald Trump, and the Republican Party.
In some ways, but if you look at the polls, Trump is not doing that bad.
No, he's not. But
but that's what it's going to be. He's the agenda.
But the representation is what's really suffering. And in some marginal swing districts and states that are teetering on the edge, this could be a difference maker. My question to you is though, what's it going to matter if Democrats do regain the House or do get a slim Senate majority? What's it matter? We're seeing that the executive branch doesn't care.
Correct. Even if the Democrats were to get control of both the House and the Senate, and let's just say theoretically start impeachment proceedings, you're not going to get any documents out of the Trump White House. Mm-mm. You're not going to get any testimony from Trump officials. the Congress can issue subpoenas, and the Trump DOJ is not going to enforce them.
Nope.
And we'll see what happens with the spending. But if Congress tries to regain control of spending and Trump just refuses to abide by it, where are we? I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's why it's important to see how the Trump White House and the Justice Department continues to react to judicial decisions, because the judiciary is the one branch right now that seems to be standing up to him. And again, there's a lot of shrugging it off by the executive branch. This is what worries me. I mean, again, say we do retake the House in 26, and that leads to a 2028 election cycle where presumably he or someone he anoints to be the heir apparent doesn't win. I don't know. I don't know what happens, but it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel like it's going to be that peaceful transition of power, because we didn't get it the first time, and the American people knew this.
That is correct. This everything he's doing, he told us he was going to do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a strange phenomenon. The MAGA people, when Trump is lying, they believe him. And when he tells them the truth, they act like, no, he's not. He doesn't mean that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when he's lying, they believe him. When he's telling the truth, they dismiss it. So it's I don't know how you fight that.
Let's pull this back. We're with Jay Bookman from the Georgia Recorder. Let's pull this back to the state of Georgia. State of Georgia now, without Department of Education funding, loses about 16% of its budget. I don't know if they're just going to cut a check and send this money back, but I mean, this just makes Georgia a bigger taker. A lot of those red states are bigger takers than givers when it comes to taxation. It just makes Georgia a bigger handout state, I guess, at this point, or suffering 16% of loss in its education funding. This is going to impact counties that voted overwhelmingly for Donald Trump.
Sure. As the whole panoply of Trump proposals. If you slash Medicaid, who's that going to hurt?
Yeah.
The counties that supported Trump.
Yeah.
The rural counties, the rural hospitals will be closing. You're already seeing rural Social Security offices being closed in Georgia. USAID money and agriculture, exports overseas. The farm industries are going to be hurt. They're already being hurt. So, yeah.
We're with George Foreman, columnist with the Georgia Recorder. I'm going to ask him about Brian Kemp potentially being something of a MAGA firewall for us in Georgia. Ponder that when the Ron Show returns on America One Radio, Progressive Voices via TuneIn. The piece is titled "Flushing Federal Systems Down the Toilet Could Return Georgia to Days of Foul Water and Air." That's commentary in the Georgia Recorder. Dropped late last week from my guest, Jay Bookman, columnist, journalist with the Georgia Recorder, and I thank him for joining us. Final few minutes what we have with him right here. Let me ask you this. Do you feel as if, and this is an honest assessment on my part here, as much as I loathe Brian Kemp, I feel as if Brian Kemp is just a little bit of a firewall from MAGA extremism for us in the state of Georgia. Does that make sense? Is that an assessment? Yeah.
That's like, yes.
Which begs the question, of these cuts or of these decisions that are still forthcoming from the federal government, what powers do you think Brian Kemp will be able to wield to sort of soften that blow for us here in Georgia?
I doubt he will have much power to do that. I don't know what the power would emanate from.
Well, for example, if the education funding doesn't come through, we're sitting on like a 16 or I guess it'll be $15 billion now surplus that he can sort of lean in on to soften that blow.
Yep.
When it comes to you leaned in a lot on your column on environmental standards and practices that have come a long way in the last 30 to 40 years that directly impact the city of Atlanta, for example, when it comes to traffic and air quality, et cetera, and so on. And maybe there can be some sort of he doesn't seem to have the inclination to push for it legislatively now, but perhaps in the next General Assembly session, or if he calls a special session, there can be some touches that he can make to strengthen Georgia's resolve when it comes to environmental issues. It just doesn't sound like something that a Republican administration on any level would do. But again, Brian Kemp is something of a firewall for us. Maybe he starts to moderate a little bit.
I think he's only. I would think he's only a firewall in the sense of moderating MAGA at the state level. Of what state government attempts to do, and it's going to be very interesting because you're going to see Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones, who's was a part of the effort to overthrow the election. He'll be running for governor next year, or at the end of Kemp's term, against our Attorney General, and who's more of a Kemp type. So you're going to have that's going to be a battle of identity for the Georgia Republican Party.
Well, and you hear noise about Marjorie Taylor Greene running for a statewide office. I would assume she's thinking Senate. Maybe she's thinking governor. That's something of a litmus test as well.
Yeah, I don't think she would not. I would be very surprised if she could win a statewide, even the Republican nomination for a statewide seat.
No, I agree 1,000%. I don't think she'd get past a primary either. But I just think it's a good litmus. It would kind of give us an idea of what the temperature is statewide when it comes to being a Republican versus a MAGA extremist.
Right, and so I think we'll see. Next gubernatorial election will go a long way in deciding that. Georgia's not had a ultra conservative governor. They've been conservative Republicans. Before that, they were conservative Democrats, but they weren't. They were good business people, so to speak.
You've been at this a while now, and I'm not trying to age you or date you or anything like this, but you've been at this a while now in journalism, and you've covered politics for quite a long time. Is there a danger in us even having conversations like this, even thinking about elections and projecting 2026 or who's going to run in 2028? When, again, I keep going back to the very real fear that what's it going to matter if we don't have a transition of power or acknowledgement of three equal branches of government at the federal level? Is there something that maybe us in the conversation in the audio spectrum or journalism in general just isn't covering this hostile takeover enough?
No, I think we have to at this point assume there will be elections, assume those elections will be honored. The outcome of those elections will be honored. Even if I'm dubious that's the case. Because if that's the course you take, then you give up on the elections in the first place. And B, the best case it would be that you'd have a peaceful transfer of power at the end of this Trump term would be an overwhelming defeat at the polls. Yeah. I mean, that's the least painful, least violent way of winning.
Which is ironic because I've been saying for a while now that the American public, which again the Democratic Party has its own issues, but the American public, when you poll them just without the brand on platforms, the Democratic Party has the sales pitch that the American people overwhelmingly approve of. They just don't approve of the Democratic Party right now. We saw a poll last week, 27% favorability, and a lot of that is dissatisfaction with Democrats for their party and its leadership. When you have the bumbling, Chuck Schumer and just not really feeling the vibe, the pulse of the country right now. And then you've got Bernie and AOC out there together. Tim Walz out there packing halls and arenas and gyms, having conversations. Is there something brewing there?
Yes, for sure. But we don't know what yet.
Yeah.
People are, the Democrats, as you say, a lot of Democrats are disenchanted with the Democratic Party, and that's showing up in those poll numbers you cite. Where's the leadership going to come from? What's it going to look like? We've seen a huge transformation in the Republican Party. We have not seen a similar transformation, a counteracting transformation in the Democratic Party. We're still the Democrats are still the party that they were 10 years ago,
Mm.
basically. So I think that's going to happen. You can have an equal and opposite reaction.
Which, yeah, and I feel like Chuck Schumer might be the last domino to fall when it comes to that, that pivot from establishment to something a little more leftward. Even though you've got deep-pocketed donors, the Democratic Party who wanted to get rid of deep-pocketed donors, you've got deep-pocketed donors that are pushing to revive that third way, moderate centrism that hasn't worked for them since 2016.
Yeah, it's fair game. I mean, everybody on the Democratic side has a theory on why the Democratic Party sucks.
Yeah. I feel like all that conversation happens, and listen, I'm as guilty as anybody else, but I feel like a lot of that conversation happens without realizing just how close Kamala Harris came to winning in 2024. I mean, we're talking like 250,000 votes in 3 different states, and she might not have won the popular vote, but she would have won the Electoral College, which would have been beautiful. I mean, then we would have wanted to see, 2 parties wanting to address the Electoral College at least, but it's not as if, the Democratic Party completely lost because of ideas. They lost because of inflation, which was a global thing, and countries around the world suffered similar defeats. The party of incumbency lost throughout the globe for the very same reasons. And again, we've got the hood popped open, and we're just rearranging wires and plugs, thinking that the whole thing's got to get rebuilt. Are Democrats even wrong to do that, or is there a retooling that's necessary?
I think intellectually you're correct about how close the election was, how close the loss was. The Republicans have a 3 or 4 vote margin in the House. So yeah, it's still 50-50, but it doesn't feel that way to people. Not when Trump is rampaging like that, as he is, and with very little of any pushback or control. I mean, as you mentioned, the judges are attempting to do some of that, but we'll see how effective that is and what happens when it gets to the Supreme Court, as it will, and whether Trump even agrees to abide by whatever judicial rulings we see. It just doesn't. So it feels like, and Trump has succeeded in this. He's claimed a huge mandate. He's acting like he has a huge mandate, and he's making changes as if he has a huge mandate. So effectively, he has a huge mandate, even though the numbers say otherwise.
So I understand you've been on the mend here for a little bit, had a little bit of surgery, and have been off the grid a little bit. Have you had a chance to catch up on movies or television? There's a good movie that came out last year called Civil War. The A24 folks put that out. Have you had a chance to see that?
I have not. I know of it, but I have not seen it.
Yeah. Maybe go watch that. I feel like there's something to glean from that.
Okay.
Dead serious. Set in modern times.
I'm just wary of, yeah. Well, that is a potential situation that we face. I think that, for instance, Trump's use of the Alien Enemy Act and just declaring that this is an invasion, even though it's not by any legal or dictionary definition an invasion, that he claims all this huge power. I think this is a dry run for when you start getting demonstrations and protests, he will likewise declare martial law.
Scary stuff. Scary stuff.
I think this is just a dry run for that.
Yeah, I hate to be hyperbolic like that, but I mean, all signs point to this. It's hard to ignore it.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah. Jay Bookman, Georgia recorder, and his new piece out that displays exactly the sort of repercussions that the state of Georgia can feel from just looking in the last 34 years with what some federal agencies have been able to do to help Georgia overcome its own issues, from water quality, air quality, traffic, et cetera, and so on. We'll put that column in the show notes at ronshowatl.com. Thanks for joining me, and hope you're getting better and feeling better. I know you're getting out and doing some walking, so it's good to hear that.
I'm doing 100% better, much better. Appreciate
that. Thank you much. Jay Bookman, Georgia recorder, for joining The Ron Show.
Thank you.
He writes, this is the last line in that column. It's as if we're playing a giant game of Jenga with our country, pulling out a piece here, then a piece there, wondering which piece will be the one that makes the structure fall. My thanks to Jay for joining us today. Show notes, as always, at ronshowatl.com. This show re-airs at 5 p.m., 9 a.m., 5 p.m. weekdays on America One Radio. They have their own app, by the way. Download it for iOS or Google Play. Progressive Voices via TuneIn at 11 p.m., and then wherever you podcast. Have yourselves a great day. We'll see you Tuesday.